What if the most successful submarine commander in American history was destroyed not by depth charges or enemy aircraft, but by his own torpedo turning around and coming back to kill him? What if the deadliest hunter in the Pacific Ocean became the hunted in a matter of seconds, struck down by a weapon that was supposed to sink enemy ships, but instead sank the very submarine that launched it? What if 5 patrols of unprecedented success, 24 ships sent to the bottom on a single mission, ended with a mechanical error that took 12 seconds to transform victory into catastrophe? This is the story of USS Tang SS-306 and her legendary commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane, the officer who sank more enemy tonnage than any other submarine captain in World War II. This is the story of a submarine so effective that she terrorized Japanese shipping lanes from the Yellow Sea to the Formosa Strait, so aggressive that her crew called their boat the most dangerous submarine in the Pacific, meaning dangerous to the enemy. This is the story of how 5 war patrols wrote O'Kane's name into the annals of naval history, and how one mechanical error on that 5th patrol ended everything in a flash of fire and twisted steel. Commander O'Kane survived. Most of his crew did not, and when the war ended just months later, the men who had made Tang the deadliest submarine in the American fleet were either dead on the ocean floor, dead in Japanese prison camps, or carrying scars and memories that would last the rest of their lives. The torpedo that killed Tang was an American weapon, a Mark 18 electric torpedo that was supposed to run straight and true toward enemy ships. Instead, it curved in a fatal circle and came back to destroy the submarine that had launched it. One mechanical error, 80, 7 men aboard, 9 survivors. The war was almost over, and Tang would never see the peace she had fought so hard to achieve. Richard O'Kane was born in Dover, New Hampshire on February 2, 1911, into a family with no particular naval tradition. He attended the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, graduating in 1934 in a class that would produce numerous distinguished officers during the coming war. O'Kane was not a standout at the academy, finishing in the middle of his class, showing no particular indication of the extraordinary officer he would become. His early naval career was similarly unremarkable. He served on surface ships before volunteering for submarine duty, attracted by the independence and responsibility that submarine command offered. The submarine service was a small community within the Navy, a brotherhood of men who lived and worked in cramped steel tubes beneath the ocean surface, completely dependent on each other for survival. O'Kane completed submarine school and was assigned to various boats in the years before World War II. He learned the intricate systems that kept submarines alive, the delicate balance of buoyancy and pressure, the constant vigilance required to operate a vessel that could become a steel coffin at any moment. He was competent, but not exceptional, one of many junior officers learning their trade in the peacetime Navy. Everything changed on December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor transformed the American military overnight, and the submarine force suddenly became one of the most important weapons in the arsenal. The Pacific Fleet's battleships had been devastated at Pearl Harbor, but the submarines had survived. They would carry the fight to Japan while the surface fleet rebuilt. O'Kane was assigned as executive officer aboard USS Wahoo, a Gato-class submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton. Morton was one of the most aggressive submarine commanders in the Pacific, a man who believed in taking the fight to the enemy at every opportunity. Under Morton's command, Wahoo became famous for her daring attacks and high success rate. O'Kane thrived under Morton's leadership. He discovered that he had a talent for the brutal mathematics of submarine warfare, the calculations of angle and speed, and timing that determined whether torpedoes hit their targets. He became Morton's right hand, handling the periscope during attacks while Morton maneuvered the boat into position. The partnership was extraordinarily effective. During Wahoo's patrols, O'Kane learned the aggressive tactics that would define his own command. Morton believed in surface attacks at night, using the submarine's speed advantage on the surface to position for devastating torpedo salvos. He believed in pressing attacks even when escorts were present, in staying in the patrol area until all torpedoes were expended. He believed that the way to win the war was to sink ships, as many ships as possible, as quickly as possible. O'Kane absorbed these lessons and would later apply them with even greater intensity. He watched Morton command with absolute confidence, making split-second decisions that meant life or death for the crew. He learned that hesitation was the enemy, that aggressive action almost always produced better results than caution. Wahoo's success under Morton made her one of the most celebrated submarines in the fleet, but submarine warfare was extraordinarily dangerous, and even the best commanders could be killed. In October 1943, Wahoo departed on her 7th war patrol and was never heard from again. She was lost with all hands, including Dudley Morton, somewhere in the Sea of Japan. O'Kane had left Wahoo before that final patrol, assigned to command a new submarine being built at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. The boat was USS Tang, a newer and more capable design than Wahoo, incorporating lessons learned from the first years of submarine warfare. O'Kane was determined to make Tang even more successful than Wahoo had been, to honor Morton's memory by sinking even more enemy ships. Tang was commissioned on October 15, 1943, with O'Kane as her first and only commanding officer. She was 311 feet long, displaced about 1,500 tons surfaced and 400 tons submerged, and could make over 20 knots on the surface and 9 knots submerged. Her armament included 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, with a capacity of 24 torpedoes. A 4-inch deck gun and various smaller weapons provided surface armament. O'Kane personally selected his crew, choosing men he believed would share his aggressive approach to combat. He wanted sailors who would remain calm under pressure, who would perform their duties perfectly even when depth charges were exploding around them. He wanted officers who could make decisions independently, who would take initiative when circumstances required it. The crew O'Kane assembled was a reflection of his own philosophy. They trained relentlessly, running drill after drill until every man could perform his duties blindfolded. O'Kane accepted nothing less than perfection. A mistake in submarine warfare could kill everyone aboard, and O'Kane intended for his crew to make no mistakes. Tang departed on her first war patrol on January 27, 1944, heading for the waters around the Caroline Islands and Truk Atoll. O'Kane intended to establish immediately that his boat would be an aggressive killer, not a cautious observer. He did not have to wait long for the opportunity to prove himself. On February 17, Tang encountered a Japanese convoy and attacked with devastating effect. O'Kane brought the submarine to the surface at night, using the darkness to close with the enemy while remaining invisible. His first salvo of torpedoes struck home, sending cargo ships to the bottom in explosions that lit up the night. Over the next several days, Tang continued to find and attack Japanese shipping. O'Kane demonstrated the aggressive tactics he had learned under Morton, pressing attacks even when escorts were nearby, staying on the surface to use his speed advantage, expending torpedoes until none remained. By the time Tang returned to Pearl Harbor, she had been credited with sinking 5 ships totaling over 20,000 tons. It was an impressive debut, but O'Kane was not satisfied. He believed Tang could do better, that he could sink more ships with fewer torpedoes, that every patrol should be more successful than the last. He drove his crew relentlessly, demanding improvements in every aspect of their performance. Tang's second war patrol began on March 16, 1944, targeting shipping in the Palau and Philippine areas. O'Kane found the hunting excellent. Japanese convoys continued to move through these waters, carrying supplies and reinforcements to the Empire's far-flung garrisons. Tang intercepted and attacked with her characteristic aggression. This patrol established patterns that would continue throughout Tang's career. O'Kane preferred night surface attacks, using radar to locate targets and then closing at high speed to launch torpedoes at close range. He was willing to engage multiple ships simultaneously, firing spreads of torpedoes at different targets and then maneuvering for follow-up attacks. He showed no fear of enemy escorts, believing that aggressive action kept them off balance and unable to mount effective counterattacks. The results were spectacular. Tang was credited with sinking 6 ships on her second patrol, bringing her total to 11 ships in just 2 deployments. O'Kane was becoming known throughout the submarine force as one of the most effective commanders afloat, but success in submarine warfare came with terrible risks. Every attack brought the possibility of counterattack. Depth charges could crush a submarine's hull, killing everyone aboard in seconds. Aircraft could catch a surfaced submarine and bomb it before it could dive. A single lucky shot from an escort could end everything. O'Kane accepted these risks as the price of doing business. He believed that the way to survive was to attack so effectively that the enemy never had time to mount an effective response. Keep them off balance. Keep them reacting to you instead of hunting you. Sink ships faster than they could organize their defenses. Tang's third war patrol targeted the Yellow Sea and East China Sea, waters closer to the Japanese home islands where shipping was heavier but defenses were more intense. O'Kane was undeterred by the increased danger. He believed that Tang could operate effectively in any waters if her crew performed at the level he demanded. The patrol was another remarkable success. Tang intercepted convoy after convoy, attacking with the relentless aggression that had become her trademark. O'Kane demonstrated his skill at coordinating multiple attacks, engaging several ships simultaneously, and then circling back to finish off damaged vessels. One engagement during this patrol demonstrated O'Kane's tactical brilliance and personal courage. After attacking a convoy and sinking several ships, Tang found herself being hunted by Japanese escorts. Rather than flee, O'Kane maneuvered to attack the escorts themselves, turning the tables on ships that were supposed to be hunting him. The gamble paid off. Tang's torpedoes damaged one escort and forced the others to break off their pursuit. O'Kane had demonstrated that he could fight his way out of trouble as effectively as he could fight his way into it. By the end of her third patrol, Tang had been credited with sinking 10 more ships, bringing her total to 21 vessels destroyed. She was already one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific, and O'Kane showed no signs of slowing down. Tang's fourth war patrol took her to the waters around Formosa and the Philippines, areas of intense Japanese naval activity. The patrol lasted from August to September 1944, coinciding with the American preparation for the invasion of the Philippines that would soon plunge the entire region into massive naval battles. O'Kane found the hunting excellent but dangerous. Japanese escorts were more numerous and more aggressive in these waters, responding to the growing American submarine threat with increased vigilance. Tang had to work harder for her kills, exercising more caution while maintaining the aggressive posture that defined her operations. Despite the increased danger, the results continued to impress. Tang was credited with sinking 6 more ships during her 4th patrol, bringing her career total to 27 vessels destroyed. O'Kane was now unquestionably the most successful submarine commander in the American fleet. The crew had become a perfectly tuned fighting machine after 4 patrols together. Every man knew his job and the jobs of those around him. They could respond to emergencies with silent efficiency, performing complex procedures in darkness, while depth charges exploded around them. They trusted O'Kane absolutely, believing that he would bring them through any situation alive. O'Kane returned the trust. He knew that his success depended entirely on his crew's performance. The captain made the decisions, but the crew executed them. A single failure at any position could doom the entire boat. O'Kane pushed his men hard because he knew that demanding perfection was the only way to keep them alive. After a brief rest and refit at Pearl Harbor, Tang departed on her 5th war patrol on September 24, 1944. O'Kane had been given a target area in the Formosa Strait, the narrow passage between Taiwan and mainland China, through which massive amounts of Japanese shipping passed daily. It was one of the most target-rich environments in the Pacific, and O'Kane intended to exploit it fully. The hunting was everything O'Kane had hoped for. Japanese convoys moved through the strait in a constant stream, carrying troops and supplies to reinforce the Empire's crumbling positions. Tang found targets almost immediately and began the systematic destruction that had made her famous. On October 10-11, Tang attacked a large convoy, sinking several ships in a series of night surface attacks that demonstrated O'Kane's mastery of aggressive submarine tactics. The convoy escorts mounted counterattacks, but Tang evaded with the skill born of 4 previous patrols. O'Kane maneuvered his boat through the chaos, finding new targets and launching torpedoes until his tubes were empty. The attacks continued through mid-October as Tang reloaded and repositioned for new engagements. O'Kane was determined to make this patrol even more successful than the previous ones, to sink more ships than any American submarine had ever sunk on a single patrol. On the night of October 23-24, 1944, Tang found another convoy and attacked with characteristic ferocity. O'Kane brought the submarine to the surface and closed with the enemy at high speed. Torpedoes lanced out toward the convoy, and ships began to explode and sink in the darkness. But this attack was different from the ones that had come before. The escorts reacted quickly and aggressively, forcing Tang to maneuver violently to avoid depth charges and gunfire. O'Kane pressed on regardless, convinced that aggressive action would carry the day as it always had. By the early morning hours of October 24, Tang had expended all but 2 of her 24 torpedoes. The convoy had been devastated. Ships were burning and sinking across miles of ocean. O'Kane estimated that he had sunk at least 8 vessels that night alone, perhaps more. He decided to use his final 2 torpedoes on a damaged transport that was struggling to escape. It was the kind of decision O'Kane had made dozens of times before, the choice to expend every weapon in pursuit of maximum destruction. Nothing would be held in reserve. Every torpedo would find an enemy ship. Tang closed with the damaged transport, approaching to within 1,000 yards to ensure a hit. At Zhou 220, O'Kane ordered the first of the remaining torpedoes fired. It ran true and struck the target, adding another victim to Tang's already impressive total for the patrol. At Zhou 225, O'Kane ordered the final torpedo fired. It was a Mark 18 electric torpedo, one of the newer weapons in the American arsenal. The Mark 18 was designed to leave no wake that could be traced back to the launching submarine, giving it a significant advantage over older steam-powered torpedoes. The torpedo left the tube and appeared to run normally toward the target. O'Kane watched through binoculars from the bridge, expecting to see another explosion as the weapon struck home. Instead, he saw something that made his blood freeze. The torpedo was turning. It was curving to the left, away from its intended target, and it kept turning, describing a fatal circle that was bringing it back toward Tang. The Mark 18 torpedo had a known defect that had plagued the weapon since its introduction. Sometimes the steering mechanism would fail, causing the torpedo to turn in an uncontrolled circle. The Navy was aware of this problem, but had not adequately addressed it. The Mark 18 was faster to produce than older designs, and the demands of the war required weapons in quantity, even if their quality was imperfect. O'Kane had perhaps 20 seconds to react as his own torpedo curved back toward Tang. There was no time to dive. The submarine required at least 30 seconds to submerge even in an emergency. There was no time to maneuver. The torpedo was moving at over 40 knots, closing the distance faster than Tang could turn. O'Kane shouted a warning to the men on the bridge. It was all he had time to do. The Mark 18 struck Tang in the after-torpedo room at 0225 on October 25, 1944, detonating with the same force it would have used against an enemy ship. The explosion was catastrophic. The entire after section of the submarine was destroyed instantly, killing everyone in that compartment. The stern plunged downward as water rushed into the shattered hull. O'Kane and several other men were thrown from the bridge by the force of the explosion. They found themselves in the water, watching their submarine die beneath them. Tang's stern had already disappeared, and her bow was rising at a steep angle as the after compartments flooded. Within seconds, Tang slipped beneath the waves. She settled to the bottom in about 180 feet of water, her bow pointing upward at an angle, her stern crushed by the explosion that had killed her. The most successful submarine in the American fleet had been destroyed by her own weapon. But the story of Tang was not quite over. Incredibly, some men in the forward compartments had survived both the explosion and the sinking. They were trapped in a submarine resting on the ocean floor, with no power, rapidly depleting air, and almost no hope of rescue. Japanese ships were searching the area above them, dropping depth charges on any contacts. The survivors in the forward torpedo room faced an impossible choice. They could remain in the submarine and die slowly as their air ran out, or they could attempt to escape using moms and lungs, early breathing devices designed for exactly this situation. The escape would be dangerous. They would have to flood the compartment, open the hatch against significant water pressure, and ascend 180 feet to the surface while breathing from a device that had never been tested under such conditions. The senior man in the forward compartment was Lieutenant Lawrence Savodkin, the boat's engineering officer. He organized the survivors and prepared them for escape. There were about 30 men still alive in the forward compartments, though many were injured from the explosion and subsequent depth charging. The first escape attempts began several hours after the sinking. Men entered the escape trunk one or two at a time, flooded it, opened the hatch, and tried to ascend to the surface. The pressure at 180 feet was brutal, and the ascent required perfect execution of procedures that most of the men had only practiced in training. Some men made it out alive. They shot to the surface, gasping for air, finding themselves in the middle of a debris field where Japanese vessels were still searching for survivors. Others died in the attempt, overcome by pressure or unable to clear the escape trunk properly. O'Kane and the other men who had been thrown from the bridge were picked up by Japanese patrol boats within hours of the sinking. They were beaten and interrogated, forced to watch as their captors searched for more survivors. The Japanese suspected that other Americans might escape from the sunken submarine. Throughout the morning of October 25, small groups of men continued to escape from Tang's forward compartments. Each successful escape was a miracle of courage and determination. Each failure added to the death toll of a crew that had already lost most of its members. By the time the last escape attempt was made, only a handful of men had reached the surface alive. Of the approximately 87 men who had been aboard Tang when she was struck by her own torpedo, only 9 survived. 8 had escaped from the sunken submarine through the forward torpedo room. O'Kane was the 9th, having been on the bridge when the explosion occurred. The 9 survivors were taken prisoner by the Japanese. They were transported to prison camps in Japan, where they endured months of brutal treatment, starvation, and abuse. The Japanese did not know that they had captured the commander of the most successful American submarine of the war, and O'Kane did not enlighten them. The prison camps were a nightmare that in some ways exceeded the horror of the sinking itself. The prisoners were beaten regularly, fed starvation rations, forced to work despite their weakened conditions. Many American prisoners in Japanese camps died from disease, malnutrition, or outright murder. The Tang survivors endured this treatment for the remaining months of the war. The war that had consumed so many lives was finally winding down. American forces had invaded the Philippines, and the Japanese Empire was crumbling under the weight of naval blockade and strategic bombing. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 finally ended the conflict, less than a year after Tang's loss. O'Kane and the other Tang survivors were liberated when American forces entered Japan. They emerged from the prison camps as shadows of their former selves, emaciated and sick, bearing physical and psychological scars that would never fully heal. But they were alive, which was more than could be said for the 78 men who had died when Tang was lost. O'Kane returned to the United States as a hero, though he did not feel like one. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary achievements as Tang's commander, the citation noting his sinking of 24 ships during the 5th Patrol alone. But the medal could not bring back the men who had died, could not erase the memory of watching his submarine sink, with most of his crew trapped inside. The statistics of Tang's career were staggering. In 5 war patrols spanning less than a year, she had been credited with sinking 33 ships totaling over 116,000 tons. This was the highest total of any American submarine during World War II. O'Kane himself was credited with destroying more enemy shipping than any other submarine commander, a record that would never be surpassed. But statistics could not capture the human cost of Tang's loss. 78 men had died, most of them killed instantly when their own torpedo struck. The survivors had endured months of imprisonment under brutal conditions. The families of the dead had received telegrams informing them that their loved ones were lost, killed not by enemy action, but by a mechanical failure in an American weapon. The Mark 18 torpedo that destroyed Tang was eventually replaced by improved designs that corrected the circular run problem. The Navy learned from the failures that had cost Tang and other submarines their crews. But the lessons were learned too late for the men who paid the price for defective weapons. O'Kane remained in the Navy after the war, eventually rising to the rank of Rear Admiral before retiring. He never forgot the crew of Tang, never stopped honoring the memory of the men who had died under his command. He wrote a book about his submarine experiences, describing both the triumphs and the tragedy of Tang's 5 patrols. The burden of command weighed on O'Kane for the rest of his life. He had made the decision to fire that final torpedo. He had brought Tang to within 1,000 yards of the target. He had pressed the attack when a more cautious commander might have withdrawn with the torpedoes he had already expended. The mechanical failure was not his fault, but the decision to fire that particular torpedo at that particular moment was his alone. Every commander who sends men into battle carries this burden. The decisions they make determine who lives and who dies, and those decisions must often be made with incomplete information under extreme pressure. O'Kane made thousands of decisions during Tang's 5 patrols, and almost all of them were correct. The one that killed his submarine was not a tactical error, but a mechanical failure in a weapon he had every reason to trust. The wreck of Tang was located by divers years after the war, resting on the bottom of the Formosa Strait exactly where she had sunk. The submarine's hull showed the devastating damage from her own torpedo. The after section crumpled and torn by the explosion. The forward compartments from which the survivors had escaped were relatively intact, a silent testament to the courage of the men who had made that desperate ascent. Tang is now designated as a war grave, protected by international law from salvage or disturbance. The men who died aboard her rest there still, entombed in the submarine they had served so well. Their sacrifice is honored every year by the submarine community, which remembers both Tang's remarkable achievements and her tragic end. Commander O'Kane died on February 16, 1994, at the age of 83. He had lived a full life after the war, serving his country with distinction and raising a family. But the memories of Tang were always with him, the pride in what his crew had accomplished, and the grief for those who had not survived. The story of Tang encapsulates the brutal reality of submarine warfare. It was the most dangerous form of combat in World War II, with casualty rates that exceeded any other branch of the American military. Submarines operated alone in enemy waters, far from any support, completely dependent on their own resources and the skill of their crews. When something went wrong, there was often no second chance. Tang's 5 patrols demonstrated what a submarine could accomplish when commanded by an officer of extraordinary skill and courage. O'Kane sank more ships than any other American submarine captain, terrorized Japanese shipping lanes, and contributed significantly to the naval blockade that strangled the Japanese war effort. He earned every honor he received and more. But Tang's end demonstrated the terrible fragility of submarine warfare. A single mechanical failure, lasting perhaps a few seconds from the moment the torpedo's steering mechanism malfunctioned to the moment of impact, killed 78 men and destroyed the most successful submarine in the fleet. All of O'Kane's skill, all of his crew's training and dedication, could not prevent a defective weapon from circling back to kill them. The war ended months after Tang was lost. Japan surrendered in August 1945, brought to its knees by naval blockade, strategic bombing, and the atomic bombs that finally convinced the Japanese leadership that continued resistance was futile. The submarine campaign that Tang had contributed to so significantly was one of the decisive factors in Japan's defeat. The men of Tang did not live to see that victory. Most of them died in the Formosa Strait on October 25, 1944, killed by a torpedo that was supposed to sink enemy ships. The survivors endured months of brutal imprisonment, not knowing whether the war would ever end, not knowing whether they would live to see home again. When liberation finally came, the Tang survivors emerged from the prison camps to a world that had changed dramatically. The war they had fought was over. The enemy they had faced was defeated. The submarine that had been their home was a shattered wreck on the ocean floor. They were alive, but they were forever marked by what they had experienced. 5 patrols, 33 ships sunk, 1 mechanical error, 78 dead, 9 survivors. The war over before the survivors could rejoin it. The story of USS Tang is a story of extraordinary achievement and devastating loss. It is a story of courage and skill pushed to their absolute limits. It is a story of men who trusted their weapons and were betrayed by mechanical failure. It is a story that reminds us that war is always more complicated than the simple narratives of victory and defeat. Commander O'Kane earned his place in history through 5 patrols of unprecedented success. He also earned his place in history through the tragedy that ended those patrols, the mechanical error that killed his crew and destroyed his submarine. Both aspects of his legacy are inseparable, the triumph and the tragedy bound together forever. The Mark 18 torpedo that circled back to kill Tang is a reminder that the weapons of war are not always reliable, that the technology we trust with our lives can fail at the worst possible moment. The Navy eventually fixed the problem, but not before Tang and other submarines paid the price for defective weapons. The survivors of Tang carried their memories for the rest of their lives. They remembered the patrols that had made them famous, the attacks that had sunk dozens of enemy ships. They remembered the night their own torpedo turned on them, the explosion that killed their friends, the desperate escape from a submarine resting on the ocean floor. They remembered the prison camps and the liberation, the joy of survival, and the grief for those who had not survived. O'Kane spoke for all of them when he wrote about Tang's last moments, about watching his submarine sink with most of his crew trapped inside. The image haunted him until the end of his days, the memory of men he had led and lost, the knowledge that nothing he could have done would have prevented that mechanical failure from claiming their lives. 5 Petrels wrote Richard O'Kane's name into history. One mechanical error ensured that his name would be remembered not just for triumph but for tragedy as well. The war ended months later, but for the men of Tang, the war ended on October 25, 1944, in the Formosa Strait, when their own torpedo came back to find them.